In the small, unremarkable town of Ashford, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, stood an abandoned house known as the Hollow House. It had long been the subject of local lore. Whispers of strange sounds and flickering lights had kept curious kids at bay. But the most chilling tale was of the family that had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only echoes of their laughter. One rainy afternoon, a group of 4 friends, Jake, Mia, Alex, and Lila, decided to explore the notorious house. Armed with flashlights and an adventurous spirit, they ventured inside, the door creaking ominously as it swung open. The air inside was stale and heavy, filled with the scent of mildew and decay. Dust motes danced in the beams of their flashlights, and shadows flickered at the edges of their vision. They stepped cautiously through the foyer, the floorboards groaning underfoot. "What was that?" Mia asked, pausing to listen. There it was again, a soft, rhythmic tapping that seemed to echo from the upper floor. "Probably just a bird or something," Jake dismissed, trying to keep the mood light, but even he felt a shiver creep up his spine. As they climbed the staircase, the tapping grew louder, more insistent, as if someone or something was beckoning them. The second floor was dark, save for a few slivers of light peeking through boarded-up windows. They ventured down the narrow hallway, where peeling wallpaper revealed faded images of a family. Suddenly, Lila gasped. "Look!" She pointed to a door at the end of the hall, slightly ajar. The tapping was coming from inside. With a mix of trepidation and curiosity, they approached. Jake pushed the door open, revealing a small, dimly lit nursery. The air felt colder here, almost electric. An old rocking chair sat in the corner, creaking back and forth on its own, despite the absence of any breeze. On the floor lay a collection of dusty toys, dolls with cracked porcelain faces and a wooden horse with a chipped mane. "Okay, this is creepy," Alex said, eyeing the rocking chair. "Let's get out of here." But before they could turn to leave, a soft giggle echoed through the room, sending chills down their spines. "Who's there?" Mia called out, her voice trembling. The giggle transformed into a high-pitched laughter, then abruptly fell silent. Lila stepped forward, compelled by a mix of fear and fascination. "Maybe it's just a trick of the wind," she murmured. But even she didn't believe it. As she examined the dolls, one of them caught her eye. It was a porcelain girl with striking blue eyes that seemed to follow her. Lila reached down, brushing the dust off its face. "Look at this one," she said, a shiver running through her as the doll's smile appeared almost too wide. "Let's go," Alex insisted, pulling at Lila's arm. But before they could leave, the door slammed shut behind them, plunging the room into darkness. Their flashlights flickered, illuminating the walls, which now seemed to shift and breathe. "Stay calm," Jake said, though his voice wavered. "We can just push it open." He threw himself against the door, but it wouldn't budge. Panic began to seep in as they banged on the wood, shouting for help. Just then, the rocking chair stopped moving, and the sound of soft footsteps approached. The friends froze, hearts pounding. The footsteps grew louder, echoing in the silence. Suddenly, a faint glow emerged from the corner of the room, illuminating a figure, a young girl in a tattered white dress, her hair disheveled, eyes wide and pleading. "Help me," she whispered, her voice sweet yet haunting. "I'm scared." Lila felt an inexplicable pull toward the girl. "What happened to you?" she asked, stepping closer despite the others' protests. The girl pointed to the dolls. "They don't let me leave. You have to play with me." "I don't want to play," Mia cried, backing away. But the girl's gaze hardened. In a flash, the dolls began to stir, their eyes glinting with malice. The room filled with laughter, a cacophony that drowned out their fear. The walls seemed to close in, and the air thickened with an oppressive dread. "Let us go," Jake shouted, banging on the door once more. But the girl stepped forward, her face twisting into a grotesque smile. "You can't leave until you play." Suddenly, the dolls launched themselves toward the friends, small hands grasping and pulling. The friends screamed, fighting against the tide of plastic and porcelain. Just then, Lila remembered the old stories of the Hollow House. how the family had become trapped, cursed to relive their last moments. "Wait, we can play!" she shouted over the din, desperation creeping into her voice. "Just let us go." The girl's expression shifted, her eyes narrowing. "Play what?" she asked, tilting her head like a curious bird. "Hide and seek," Lila blurted out, the words spilling from her lips. "We'll play and then we'll leave." A moment of silence fell, the laughter halting as the girl considered the offer. "Okay," she said slowly, "but you have to count first." Lila nodded, heart racing. As she began to count, the dolls hesitated, but the girl rushed to hide behind the rocking chair. The air felt charged, and the walls seemed to pulse with anticipation. When Lila reached 10, she turned around, adrenaline surging. "Ready or not, here I come," she called, and as she did, the door creaked open slightly, an invitation to freedom. "Now," Jake urged, grabbing Mia and Alex. They bolted for the door, Lila hesitating for just a moment to glance back. The girl stood there, a look of longing on her face, and for a brief instant, Lila felt a pang of sympathy. But they were outside now, breathless and terrified, the weight of the house behind them. They sprinted down the porch steps, through the yard, and into the safety of the trees, not daring to look back. Days turned into weeks, and though they had escaped the hollow house, the laughter and whispers lingered in their minds. Lila often found herself gazing at the entrance of the woods, a nagging thought taking root. Had they truly left it behind? One evening, as she was about to sleep, she heard a familiar whisper through her window, soft and melodic. "Play with me, Lila." The hollow house hadn't let go, and as Lila stared into the darkness, she knew she could never escape its grasp. Lila sat up in bed, heart pounding. The whisper echoed in her ears, a siren call pulling her from the safety of her room. She glanced around, the shadows in her room feeling thicker, more oppressive. The air hummed with a strange energy, a reminder of that cursed place. "Play with me, Lila." The voice was clearer now, almost like a soft breeze brushing against her skin. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block it out, but the sound only grew louder. That night, sleep evaded her. Memories of the hollow house flooded her mind, the girl's pleading eyes, the laughter of the dolls, the overwhelming sense of being trapped. Lila tossed and turned, the whispering pulling her closer to the edge of madness. Days passed, and her friends noticed the change in her. Lila became withdrawn, distracted, haunted by something they couldn't see. They tried to reach out, but each attempt felt like pushing against a brick wall. One evening, unable to take it anymore, she confided in Mia. "I can't stop hearing her. It's like she's right here in the room with me." Mia frowned, concern etched on her face. "You need to forget about that place, Lila. It's not real. It's just ghost stories." But Lila knew it was more than that. The memories felt too vivid, too alive. That night, she made a decision. If the girl wanted to play, maybe she needed to confront whatever darkness lingered in the hollow house. With a deep breath, she texted Jake, Alex, and Mia, urging them to meet at her house. When they gathered in her living room, she explained her plan. "We have to go back," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "We need to face whatever is haunting me." Jake shook his head. "No way. That place is dangerous. We barely escaped. I can't keep living like this," Lila pleaded, her eyes wide with desperation. "I need closure. If I confront the girl, maybe she'll leave me alone." Mia exchanged worried glances with Alex and Jake, but Lila's determination was palpable. They reluctantly agreed, though the tension in the room was thick with unease. The next day, as dusk descended, they made their way back to the hollow house. The sky was painted in shades of violet and gray, the air heavy with the scent of rain. The trees seemed to loom closer, their branches twisting like skeletal hands reaching out to snag the unwary. When they arrived, the house appeared even more foreboding than before, as if it were breathing, alive and aware of their presence. They stood at the threshold, the door creaking open with an unsettling welcome. Inside, The stale air wrapped around them like a cold embrace. The memories of laughter and joy seemed to linger in the corners, a stark contrast to the oppressive weight of silence that now filled the rooms. As they ascended the staircase, the rhythmic tapping began again, echoing from the nursery. The friends exchanged fearful glances but pressed on, compelled by Lila's resolve. When they entered the nursery, the rocking chair was still, and the dolls lay scattered across the floor. "I don't hear her," Mia whispered, glancing nervously around the room. "I have to call for her," Lila said, steeling herself. "I have to make her understand." Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, her voice steady yet soft. "I'm here. I want to play. Please, come out." The air thickened as the temperature dropped, and for a moment, nothing happened. Just when Lila thought she'd made a mistake, the girl appeared, her figure emerging from the shadows, ethereal and otherworldly. The familiar gleam of her blue eyes sent a shiver down Lila's spine. "Why did you come back?" the girl asked, her voice echoing like wind chimes in a storm. "I thought you wanted to leave." "I do," Lila said, trembling. "But I want to help you. I can't ignore you anymore. You're trapped here, just like I was." The girl's expression shifted, uncertainty flickering across her face. "They won't let you leave," she whispered, glancing toward the dolls that now sat eerily still. "They're watching." Lila turned, her heart racing as she noticed the dolls had moved closer, their cracked eyes seeming to glimmer with dark intent. "What do you mean?" she asked, fear creeping into her voice. "They don't want to play," the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They want to keep you." Suddenly, the dolls began to stir again, their porcelain hands reaching out. "Play with us, Lila," they chanted in unison, their voices a haunting melody. The friends backed away, but Lila stood her ground. "No, I won't play unless you let her go," she shouted, her voice echoing in the small room. The girl's face twisted in pain, and the laughter turned to shrieks. With each word Lila spoke, the room grew darker, shadows creeping along the walls, coiling like smoke. "You have to choose," the girl cried, her figure beginning to flicker like a candle in the wind. "You can't save me and leave." Torn between the girl's pleading eyes and the sinister presence of the dolls, Lila felt her heart race. "I don't want anyone to suffer. You deserve to be free." But as she reached out toward the girl, a deafening roar filled the room, shaking the very foundation of the house. The dolls surged forward, their laughter now a cacophony of rage. "Run!" Jake yelled, pulling Lila back, but she felt anchored in place, caught in the grip of the girl's sorrowful gaze. Suddenly, the floor beneath them began to crack, revealing a swirling darkness below. The girl screamed, her figure beginning to dissipate like mist. "You have to choose. You can't save us both." Lila's mind raced. What if this was a trap? What if the girl was just another victim, another pawn in the doll's game? But as the darkness writhed, a voice inside her urged her to make a choice, to break the cycle. "Please, I'll help you," Lila shouted, desperate. "I'll come back for you, I promise." In that moment, the girl's eyes softened, a glimmer of hope breaking through her fear. "You'll come back?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You won't forget?" "I promise," Lila said, tears streaming down her face. As she spoke those words, the dolls froze, their expressions shifting from malice to confusion. The shadows receded slightly, as if they were weighing Lila's promise against their own hunger for despair. "Go! Now!" the girl cried, urgency flooding her voice. With one last look, Lila turned and ran, her friends right behind her. They barreled down the stairs, the house shaking around them. As they burst through the front door, the air felt lighter, and the whispers faded into the distance. They reached the safety of the trees, breathless and trembling. But as they turned back to look at the hollow house, Lila felt a pang of guilt. Had she truly saved the girl, or had she merely postponed the inevitable? The promise she made echoed in her mind, a haunting reminder that the game was far from over. That night, as Lila lay in bed, the whispering returned, this time softer, more distant. but she could still hear it, lingering at the edges of her consciousness. "Play with me, Lila." She knew she couldn't escape forever. The hollow house had left its mark, and it was only a matter of time before she would have to return. And deep down, she wondered, was she ready to face the darkness again? Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. Lila tossed and turned, unable to shake the weight of her promise. The whispering faded into a haunting lullaby that seemed to weave through her dreams, echoing through her mind. Each night, it grew stronger, more insistent, as if the girl was pulling her back, beckoning her into the shadows of the hollow house. Days turned into weeks, and though Lila tried to ignore the pull, it consumed her thoughts. Her friends did their best to distract her, but every glance toward the woods sent shivers racing down her spine. Each evening, as twilight descended, she could almost hear the creaking of the rocking chair, the soft laughter of the dolls, and the urgent whisper of the girl. One night, after an especially vivid dream where the girl stood at the edge of the woods, her porcelain features shimmering in moonlight, Lila knew she could no longer resist. She had to return, not just for the girl but for herself. The girl had reached out, and in doing so, had awakened something within her, a desire to confront her fears head-on. The next evening, she gathered her friends again. "I have to go back," she declared, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "I made a promise, and I can't break it." Jake and Mia exchanged worried glances. "Lila, this is dangerous," Mia cautioned. "What if the dolls really do trap you?" "They've already haunted me long enough," Lila replied, determination stealing her resolve. "I need to face them. We need to figure out what keeps them there." Reluctantly, her friends agreed to accompany her. As they trekked back to the hollow house, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting eerie shadows that danced along the path. Each step felt heavier, as if the earth itself was warning them. When they arrived, the house loomed before them, a twisted silhouette against the darkening sky. The air was thick with anticipation, and Lila felt the familiar pull tugging at her, guiding her forward. She took a deep breath and stepped inside, her heart racing. The moment they crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped. The door creaked ominously behind them, sealing their fate. Shadows shifted and swayed, wrapping around them like tendrils of smoke. The air felt electric, charged with an unseen energy. "Let's head to the nursery," Lila suggested, her voice echoing in the silence. They climbed the staircase, the boards creaking beneath their weight, and the rhythmic tapping began again, beckoning them forward. When they entered the nursery, the rocking chair stood still, but the dolls were there, watching with their cracked, glassy eyes. The atmosphere grew thick with tension, and Lila could feel the girl's presence lingering just out of sight. "I need to call for her again," Lila said, her heart pounding. The friends exchanged nervous glances but nodded in silent support. "Please, I'm here," she called out, the words almost a plea. "I've come back to play." A moment of silence hung in the air, and then, like a whisper on the wind, the girl emerged from the shadows, her figure shimmering in the dim light. "You came back," she said, her voice filled with a mix of hope and despair. "But you shouldn't have." "I want to help you," Lila replied, stepping closer. "I need to understand why you're trapped here." The girl's eyes flickered with sadness. "The dolls, they were my friends once, but they became jealous. They wanted to keep me here forever. I can't leave without you playing with me." "Then let's play," Lila said, her voice steady despite the dread pooling in her stomach. "We can play a different game, one where we all can be free." The dolls shifted slightly, their expressions unreadable. "What kind of game?" the girl asked, her voice trembling. "Hide and seek," Lila proposed, her mind racing. "But this time we'll set the rules. If I find you, you promise to leave with me." The girl hesitated, glancing back at the dolls, who watched with predatory interest. "They won't like that," she warned, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't care what they like," Lila insisted, determination surging within her. "We can't be trapped forever. We have to break their hold over you." For a long moment, The girl studied Lila, then nodded slowly. Okay, but you have to count to 20 and I'll hide. You can't look until you're done. Lila's heart raced. Fine. Just promise me you'll be free. The girl nodded, stepping back into the shadows. Lila turned to the wall, closing her eyes. 1, 2. As she counted, she could hear the rustling of the dolls, their whispers swirling around her like a storm. When she reached 20, Lila spun around, her flashlight scanning the room. Ready or not, here I come. The nursery was eerily quiet. She moved cautiously, searching behind the rocking chair and beneath the bed, but the girl was nowhere to be found. The dolls seemed to watch her every move, their eyes glinting with malice. Where are you? Lila called, her voice trembling. But as she searched, the atmosphere shifted, a tension thickening in the air. The dolls began to stir, their movements slow and deliberate. Play with us, Lila. They sang in unison, their voices melodic yet laced with menace. Join us forever. Panic surged through Lila, but she forced herself to focus. I need to find the girl, she shouted, darting toward the far corner of the room. Just then, she heard a soft giggle, and her heart raced. She turned, catching a glimpse of the girl's white dress flickering like a candle flame. Over here, Lila yelled, sprinting toward her. But as she reached for the girl, the dolls lunged, their small hands grasping for her. No! Lila shouted, dodging to the side as the dolls tumbled forward. She felt their cold fingers brush against her skin, sending icy tendrils of fear racing through her. In the chaos, the girl's face transformed from pleading to desperate. You have to run, she cried. They'll keep you here too. With a surge of adrenaline, Lila turned and ran, the echoes of laughter ringing in her ears. Her friends were frozen in shock, staring wide-eyed at the encroaching dolls. Get out! Now! Lila shouted, her voice cutting through the panic. They scrambled toward the door, but the way felt distant, the shadows closing in around them. Just as Lila reached the threshold, she turned back one last time. The girl stood at the edge of the nursery, her expression filled with sorrow. I'll come back for you, Lila yelled, but the girl shook her head, tears streaming down her porcelain cheeks. No, you have to save yourself. And with that, the dolls surged forward, engulfing the girl in a wave of shadow. Lila stumbled back, pulling her friends through the doorway. They barreled down the stairs, the house shaking as the walls seemed to groan in fury. The laughter transformed into screams, echoing through the halls. They burst out into the night, the cool air hitting them like a wave. As they stumbled away from the house, Lila looked back. The windows glowed ominously, and for a moment, she thought she saw the girl standing in the window, her expression haunting. They didn't stop running until they reached the edge of the woods, breathless and terrified. But the memory of the girl's eyes stayed with Lila, a reminder of the promise she had made. What now? Mia gasped, her face pale. Lila looked back at the hollow house, knowing deep down that this wasn't over. I have to go back, she whispered, determination mingling with fear. I can't leave her there. And as the moon hung high in the sky, Lila knew that this was only the beginning of a game that would demand everything from her. Lila stood at the edge of the woods, the memory of the girl's sorrowful gaze etched in her mind. Her heart raced as she looked back at the looming silhouette of the hollow house. The promise she made echoed in her ears, binding her to a fate she couldn't ignore. I can't just leave her, Lila said, her voice shaky but resolute. I have to go back. Mia grabbed her arm, eyes wide with concern. Lila, you don't know what you're walking into. Those dolls, they're not just toys. They're malevolent. They're afraid of losing her, Lila argued, determination sharpening her resolve. And so is she. If I can confront them, maybe I can break their hold over her. Jake and Alex exchanged glances, the tension thick between them. Finally, Alex sighed. If we're doing this, we're doing it together. With a collective nod, they turned back toward the house, hearts pounding with every step. The air felt electric, charged with anticipation as they approached the front door once more. As they stepped inside, the door creaked ominously, almost as if warning them to turn back. Inside, the familiar musty smell enveloped them, and the shadows seemed to swirl and pulse with life. The rhythmic tapping began again, echoing from the nursery like a heartbeat. "Let's go," Lila whispered, leading the way up the stairs. This time, they moved with a purpose, every creak of the floorboards amplifying the tension. As they entered the nursery, the atmosphere shifted, thickening with dread. The rocking chair sat still, but the dolls were now arranged in a circle, their eyes glinting with malice. In the center stood the girl, her form wavering like smoke, trapped between the living and the lost. "You came back," she said, her voice a fragile whisper. "But you shouldn't have." "I promised I would," Lila replied, stepping forward. "I won't let them keep you here. We can break this cycle together." The dolls began to move, their laughter rising in a cacophony, a twisted symphony of glee. "You shouldn't have come back to play," they taunted, their voices overlapping. "You belong to us now." "No," Lila shouted, shaking with fear. "You don't own her. She deserves to be free." As she spoke, the girl looked at her with wide eyes, hope mingling with despair. "You can't fight them alone, Lila." "I won't fight alone," Lila said, glancing back at her friends. "We're all in this together." The dolls hesitated, their expressions momentarily shifting from malice to confusion. Seizing the opportunity, Lila stepped closer to the girl. "We'll play a different game where everyone can win. A game of truth." The girl's face lit up, and the dolls seemed to pause, intrigued. "What do you mean?" the girl asked. "Let's reveal the truth behind why you're trapped. If we can understand their fear, maybe we can set you free." The dolls exchanged glances, their eyes narrowing as they considered the proposition. The atmosphere grew tense, the shadows shifting ominously. "Very well." One of the dolls spoke, its voice grating like broken glass. "Reveal the truth, and perhaps we shall allow her to leave." Lila took a deep breath, heart pounding in her chest. "All right, I'll go first." She stepped into the center of the room, facing the dolls. "I'm afraid of being alone, of losing my friends. I felt abandoned, like I'm invisible sometimes." The dolls remained still, but she could feel their attention on her, and the girl's eyes sparkled with encouragement. "I've seen how easily people can drift apart," Lila continued, "and that fear has kept me from being honest with those I care about." The dolls nodded slightly, their expressions softening. "Your truth is heard," they said in unison. Next, Lila turned to the girl. "What about you? What keeps you here?" The girl swallowed hard, tears shimmering in her eyes. "I was scared too, scared of being forgotten. I thought if I stayed with the dolls, they would always be my friends." The dolls recoiled slightly, their faces revealing traces of sorrow. "We wanted to protect you," one murmured, "but our fear turned into jealousy. We became what we didn't want to be." "Then let her go," Lila pleaded. "You don't have to be trapped in fear anymore. You can choose friendship instead." The dolls looked at one another, uncertainty flickering across their porcelain faces. Lila felt the tension shift in the air, a fragile thread of hope weaving through the darkness. Finally, the head doll stepped forward. "If you can face your fears together, perhaps we can break this cycle." Lila nodded, her heart racing. "Then let's do it. We'll face our fears together." With that, Lila turned back to her friends, and they formed a circle, hands clasped tightly. "We won't let fear take hold of us. We're stronger together." The dolls watched, eyes wide, as Lila led them in a chant, her voice rising with strength. "We are not afraid. We are not alone. Together, we break the chains of the past." As they repeated the words, the air shimmered, the shadows swirling around them. The girl stepped forward, joining the circle. The dolls began to sway, their laughter shifting to something softer, almost melodic. The room pulsed with energy, and a blinding light erupted from the center of the circle. Lila shielded her eyes, feeling warmth envelop her as the darkness receded. In an explosion of color, The dolls transformed, their sharp edges softening, the malice melting away. The girl's form became more solid, her features brightening with hope. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice now steady. "You've freed us." As the light dimmed, the dolls transformed into delicate figures, no longer threatening but gentle, with smiles that radiated warmth. The girl stood fully formed, her eyes sparkling. "You kept your promise," she said, tears of joy glistening on her cheeks. "You set me free." Lila felt a wave of relief wash over her. "And we'll always remember you," she said, knowing the bonds they forged would transcend the darkness. With a final shimmer, the dolls and the girl began to fade, their forms dissolving into the air like mist. But as they vanished, a soft whisper lingered, echoing in the room. "You are never alone." The nursery grew quiet, the shadows retreating into the corners. The air felt lighter, a sense of peace enveloping them. Lila and her friends stood together, the enormity of what they had accomplished settling over them like a warm blanket. They had faced their fears and freed a soul trapped in sorrow, breaking the cycle of despair. As they walked out of the hollow house, the sun began to rise, casting golden rays through the trees. They had overcome darkness together, and the bonds they shared felt stronger than ever. In that moment, Lila realized that true freedom came from facing fear, embracing truth, and leaning on one another. The hollow house was no longer a place of haunting. It had transformed into a sanctuary of hope, and deep down, she knew that the girl would always be with her, a reminder that love and friendship could conquer even the darkest of fears. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.